In the heart of Zimbabwe, nestled between rolling hills and fertile valleys, lay the village of Nyamapanda. The village was known for its lush fields, abundant harvests, and the wisdom of its headman, Murehwa. He was a man of stature, respected by his people, and feared by those who dared to oppose him. But beneath his calm exterior, Murehwa was a troubled man. He had everything a man could desire: wealth, respect, and a loving wife called Maidei. Together they had two daughters who were the pride of their mother's heart. But in Murehwa's eyes, something was missing. He wished he'd had a son who would carry his name, his bloodline, and his legacy. The absence of a male heir troubled him, growing into a resentment he could not shake. Murehwa often found himself staring into the fire at night, his thoughts consumed by the same question: why had Maidei not given him a son? His frustration festered until it became an unspoken accusation between them. Maidei, sensing the growing distance, tried to console him, but her efforts were in vain. The more she tried, the more Murehwa became withdrawn. The village elders noticed the tension, whispering among themselves that perhaps the spirits were displeased with Murehwa. Some suggested that he should seek the counsel of the witch doctor, but Murehwa, proud and stubborn, refused to entertain such thoughts. He believed that the fault lay not with him, but with Maidei. And so he began to entertain dangerous ideas that would soon set the village on a path of turmoil. It was during one of the village's annual harvest festivals that Murehwa's resolve began to waver. The celebrations were in full swing, with music, dance, and the smell of roasting meat filling the air. It was here that Murehwa first laid eyes on Chiratizo, a young woman with striking beauty and an air of innocence. She was much younger than Maidei, with smooth, dark skin and eyes that seemed to see straight into a man's soul. Chiratizo was the daughter of a respected elder in the village, known for her kindness and humility. She had many suitors, but she had yet to find a man who could capture her heart. Murehwa, emboldened by his status as headman, began to court her in secret. He would find excuses to visit her father's homestead, bringing gifts and offering words of wisdom. At first, Chiratizo was flattered by the attention. She admired Murehwa's strength and the way he commanded respect. But as time went on, she began to feel uneasy. She knew that Murehwa was married, and though he spoke sweet words to her, she could not shake the feeling that what they were doing was wrong. But Murehwa's persistence eventually wore her down, and she found herself drawn into a web of deceit. As months passed, their secret meetings became more frequent, and soon Chiratizo found herself pregnant. When she told Murehwa the news, he was overjoyed. This was the son he had longed for, and one who would carry his name. But his joy was short-lived by the knowledge that this child would be born out of an illicit affair. He worried about the shame to his household if the child was ever discovered. The day Chiratizo gave birth was a day of mixed emotions. In the privacy of her mother's hut, away from the prying eyes of the village, she delivered a healthy baby boy. He had his father's strong features and a cry that seemed to command attention. Murehwa was filled with pride when he first held his child, naming him Tawanda, which means we have increased. He believed that this child was a sign of his favor with the ancestors. But while Murehwa rejoiced, Maidei's heart was heavy with sorrow. News of Chiratizo's pregnancy had spread through the village like wildfire, and it wasn't long before the truth reached her ears. At first, she couldn't believe it. How could Murehwa betray her like this? She had given him everything, stood by him through thick and thin, and yet he had turned to another woman for the son she could not give him? Maidei's pain quickly turned to anger. She couldn't bear the thought of Murehwa's illegitimate son taking the place of her daughters, of him being paraded around as the heir to the headman's legacy. She knew that something had to be done, but she didn't know what. As Maidei's anger festered, she found herself unable to sleep. Night after night, she lay awake, consumed by thoughts of revenge. The idea of Chiratizo's son growing up in the village, being groomed to take over from Murehwa, was too much for her to bear. She knew that Murehwa would never see things her way, and if she was to act, she would have to do so alone. One night, unable to endure the pain any longer, Maidei made a decision. She would rid herself of the child, the living reminder of her husband's betrayal. She knew the risks, the danger of what she was about to do, but she was beyond caring. Her heart was hardened, and her mind was set. She waited until the dead of night, when the village was quiet and the only sounds were the calls of nocturnal animals. Silently, she crept out of her hut and made way to Chiratizo's homestead. She moved like a shadow, her footsteps light and careful. When she reached the hut where the baby lay sleeping, she hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. But then she remembered Murehwa's coldness, his distance, and her resolve returned. With trembling hands, she picked up the sleeping baby, wrapping him in a blanket to muffle his cries. The child stirs but did not wake, and Maidei quickly left the homestead, heading towards the dark forest on the edge of the village. She knew the dangers that lay within, the wild animals that roamed the forest at night, but that was part of her plan. The forest was a place of mystery and danger, a place where the villagers seldom ventured after dark. It was said to be inhabited by spirits, both benevolent and malevolent, who could either protect or harm those who entered their domain. Maidei knew these stories well, but in her state of mind, she did not care. All she wanted was to rid herself of the child that had become the focus of her anguish. As she walked deeper into the forest, the trees closed in around her, their branches forming twisted shapes in the moonlight. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the night grew louder. The rustle of the leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the snapping of twigs under her feet. But as she continued on, Maidei began to feel a presence, something unseen but undeniably there. She paused, her heart pounding in her chest, straining her ears to catch any sound that might reveal who or what was following her. But there was nothing, just the eerie silence of the forest. Shaking off her fear, she pressed on, determined to see her plan through. But the further she walked, the stronger the feeling became. It was as if the forest was watching her, judging her, and waiting for her to make a mistake. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step, until it became impossible for Maidei to ignore. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine, as if an invisible hand had brushed against her. Panic began to set in, and she quickened her pace, but no matter how fast she walked, the presence remained with her. Suddenly, she heard a rustling behind her, and she quickly turned around, expecting to see a wild animal or a spirit. But there was nothing, only the trees swaying gently in the breeze. She turned back around, clutching the baby tighter, and began walking again, this time more quickly. But as she did, she felt the presence again, this time closer, almost breathing down her neck. Maidei's fear turned to terror. She knew she could not leave the baby here, not with this unseen force following her. She started to run, but in her panic, she lost her way. The trees started to all look the same in the darkness. She stumbled over roots and branches, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But no matter how far she ran, the presence stayed with her, as if it was guiding her. Back in the village, Chiratizo had awoken to find her baby gone. Her heart leapt in fear, and she searched frantically around the hut. But when she found no trace of him, a cold dread settled over her. She knew that something terrible had happened. Without wasting a moment, she ran through the village to the home of the local witch doctor, a man known for his connection to the spirit world. He was old, with deep-set eyes that seemed to see more than what was in front of him. When Chiratizo arrived, breathless and in tears, he was already awake, as if he had been expecting her. "The spirits have spoken to me," he said, his voice low and gravely. "Your child is in danger, but he is not alone. The spirit of his grandfather watches over him. The one who took him will not succeed," he reassured her. Chiratizo fell to her knees, sobbing in relief and fear. "What must I do?" she begged. "How can I save my son?" The witch doctor handed her a small bottle with liquid magic to protect her and muttered a prayer over it. "Go to the forest," he instructed. "Follow the path which the spirits will show you. They will guide you to your child, and he will be returned to you unharmed." Maidei had now been walking for hours, lost in the forest. Her fear had turned to exhaustion, and she could barely keep her eyes open. The baby in her arms had awoken and was crying softly, but she was too tired to try and comfort him. All she wanted was to try and find her way out of the forest, but every path she took seemed to lead her in circles. The presence that had been following her was still there, a constant, unseen force that kept her from finding her way. She began to feel as if she was in a trance, her mind foggy and confused. The trees seemed to close in on her, their branches reaching out like claws. She stumbled and fell, scraping her knees on the ground, but she forced herself to get up and keep moving. She had no idea how long she had been walking when she finally collapsed from exhaustion. The baby's cries had grown weaker, and she knew that she could not go on much longer. She closed her eyes, praying for some kind of release, but when she opened them again, she saw something that made her blood run cold. She saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching her. It was an old man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to glow with the inner light. He said nothing, but his presence filled her with a deep sense of dread. She knew, without being told, that this was the spirit of Murehwa's father, the baby's grandfather. The old man pointed a bony finger at Maidei, and she felt a wave of cold wash over her. She tried to speak, to beg for forgiveness, but her voice caught in her throat. The spirit's eyes bore into hers, filled with a sadness that cut through her like a knife. "You cannot harm the child," the spirit said, his voice echoing in her mind. "He is under my protection. Leave him here and return to the village. If you do not, the spirits will not be merciful." Maidei wanted to run, to flee from the accusing gaze of the spirit, but she found herself unable to move. She was trapped, paralyzed by fear and guilt. The spirit's presence grew stronger, filling her with a sense of impending doom. She knew that she had no choice but to obey. Meanwhile, Chiratizo had entered the forest, clutching the bottle that the witch doctor had given her. She was terrified, but she knew that she had no choice but to follow his instructions. The forest was dark and foreboding, but as she walked, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. It was as if the spirits were guiding her, just as the witch doctor had said. She followed a narrow path that seemed to appear before her, leading her deeper into the forest. The trees whispered around her, their leaves rustling in the breeze, and she could feel the presence of the spirits all around her. She prayed silently, asking the spirits to protect her and her child, and to lead her to him. After what felt like hours, she heard a faint cry in the distance. Her heart leapt, and she quickened her pace, following the sound. As she got closer, the cry grew louder, until she finally saw a figure up ahead. It was Maidei, sitting on the ground with a baby in her arms. Her face was pale and her eyes wide with fear. As dawn began to break over the village, the search party that had been organized by the villagers entered the forest. Murehwa, racked with guilt and fear for his son, led the group, his heart heavy with the consequences of his actions. He knew that his affair with Chiratizo had set off a chain of events that had spiraled out of control, and he feared what he might find in the forest. The men spread out, calling Maidei's name and listening for any sounds of the baby. As they ventured deeper into the forest, they began to find signs of struggle: broken branches, footprints in the dirt, and scraps of cloth caught on thorns. The atmosphere was tense, and the men moved cautiously, wary of the spirits that were said to inhabit the forest. It was Murehwa who finally spotted them. Maidei was sitting on the ground, holding the baby, her eyes vacant and her face as pale as death. Chiratizo stood a few feet away, her face streaked with tears, but her expression was one of relief. The baby, though weak and crying, was unharmed. Murehwa approached slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The other men stood back, unsure of what to do. The tension in the air was thick, and no one dared speak. Maidei looked up at her husband, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. She knew that what she had done was unforgivable, but she was beyond caring. Murehwa knelt beside her, reaching out to take the baby from her arms. But as he did, Maidei clutched the child tighter, shaking her head. "I couldn't do it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The spirits wouldn't let me." Tears filled Murehwa's eyes as he looked at his wife, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. He had driven her to this, forced her into a position where she felt she had no choice but to take such drastic measures. He had betrayed her, and in doing so, he had nearly destroyed his family. Chiratizo, standing nearby, watched the scene unfold with a heavy heart. She had never wanted any of this, had never intended to come between Murehwa and Maidei. All she wanted was her child, and the chance to raise him in peace. But now she knew that peace was something that would be hard to come by. The village elders were called to convene, summoned by the urgency of the situation. The matter at hand was grave, and it demanded careful deliberation. The headman had betrayed his wife and the trust of the village, and Maidei had attempted to harm an innocent child. The village was abuzz with whispers. The people were anxious to see what justice would be meted out. Murehwa stood before the elders, his head bowed in shame. He had been a respected leader, but his actions had brought dishonor upon himself and his family. The elders questioned him about his affair with Shiratizo and the events that led to the child's abduction. Murehwa answered truthfully, his voice heavy with regret. Maidei was also brought before the elders, her face pale and drawn. She admitted to taking the baby, her voice barely above a whisper. She explained the darkness that had consumed her, the overwhelming despair that had driven her to act in such desperation. But she also spoke of the spirits, of the presence that had followed her in the forest, preventing her from carrying out her plan. The elders listened in silence, their expressions grave. They knew that a decision had to be made, one that would bring justice and restore balance to the village. But they also knew that the spirits had played a role in these events, and that their will could not be ignored. After much deliberation, the elders reached their decision. Murehwa, as the headman, bore the greatest responsibility for what had transpired. He had abused his power and broken the trust of his people. As punishment, he was stripped of his title and his position as headman. He would remain in the village, but he would no longer hold any authority. The elders decreed that he must work hard to rebuild the trust he had lost, to atone for his sins through humility and service to the community. Maidei's punishment was less severe, but no less significant. She was ordered to perform a cleansing ritual overseen by the witch doctor to purify herself of the darkness that had consumed her. She was also required to make amends and help Shiratizo to take care of the child as if he were her own, as a sign of repentance. Shiratizo was allowed to keep her child, and the elders assured her that the village would support her in raising him. Though the circumstances of his birth were unconventional, the child was still a part of the community, and he would be protected and nurtured. As the days turned into weeks, the village slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Murehwa, no longer the headman, worked alongside with other villagers, toiling in the fields and helping with the daily tasks that kept the community running. He was humbled by the experience, and though it pained him to have lost his title, he knew that it was a fitting punishment for his actions. Maidei, too, found a sense of peace in her new role. The cleansing ritual had helped to lift the darkness that had weighed so heavily on her heart, and she began to see Tawanda not as a symbol of her husband's betrayal, but as a part of the village's future. She grew close to Shiratizo, and together they cared for the boy, raising him with love and wisdom. But the presence of the spirits remained a constant reminder of the events that had transpired. The villagers spoke of the baby's grandfather, the spirit who had protected him in the forest, with reverence. They knew that the spirits were there, always watching, guiding, and protecting them, and they took care to honor them in their daily lives. The story of Murehwa, Maidei, and Shiratizo became a cautionary tale passed down through the generations. It was a story of pride, betrayal, and the power of the spirits, a story that would never be forgotten in the village of Nyamapanda.